Good day, good people. I'm back with a new tutorial, and this time we are going to talk about the static keyword and the scope resolution operator. These are the two double dots that you see here. And well, what does this have to do with object-oriented PHP programming? It's easy. Sometimes it's due to scope that you cannot access variables or properties, and the static keyword helps. Okay, let's dive into some examples because I think you can always learn better with examples. Just for you to know, declaring class properties or methods as static makes them accessible without needing an instantiation of the class. That is one of the reasons why you can use static operators. And then you can define, separate between parent and self. We can refer to a parent class or to the own class. Okay, let's dive right into it. As always, here we go. We got our local host. We have, let's start from 0 here. We have a superclass, okay? That's the one to start with. Our basic class body superclass. Now, what can we do with that? Well, first of all, let's create a static variable. And you would just do it like this. You would use the keyword static, then with the $, of course, and you would call it, why not, a static var. And we set it to 0, okay? This means that this variable, static var, is already accessible from the outside of this class. Let me show you. If we were to access this variable from outside the class without having to create an object first, we can now just go ahead and call superclass, 2 of those signs, the scope resolution operator, and then we go for the static var, and this is how you would access it. So now I can go ahead, echo this out, and see what we get. We get a 0. All right. Normally, this would not be possible if I just had, even if it were a public property, we couldn't access it from outside without using an object and the this keyword. Because remember, usually you would go ahead and say Superman, and this would be a new class, and so on, okay? But now we can just access it from the outside. Now this can make some interesting things in PHP, because, for example, let's keep this variable here and erase this one. And by the way, this is public. Public is default. So if you don't set, you don't have to actually write public because it's always public. Well, we can do it or we can leave it out. I usually leave it out because it's default. If it helps you, let's keep it in here and say public. Alrighty. Let's move on. Now we can also create static functions or methods in this case. So let's go ahead and create a public static function and name this the static method. Okay, here we go, curly brackets, hit save. Now this function is accessible from the outside as well, just like this property is. And for example, we could make this function echo out our static variable, and for that we use the keyword self. Remember, usually it would be the this variable, this operator, and then the variable name. Now this doesn't work with static functions. With static functions, with static properties that you want to access, you can't use the this keyword. You use the self keyword, the scope resolution operator, and then you put your variable. Where is it? Static var. Here we go. Okay. Now you won't see anything because we haven't called it, but now we can go ahead, and since the function is static as well, we can access this static function from the outside and echo it out. For example, we go ahead and say echo superclass scope resolution static methods. Don't forget the parentheses, hit save, refresh, we get 0. Okay? Hope I'm not moving too fast. So I echo out superclass, then we are here. With the scope resolution operator, we try to access a static function or method. This is the static method. Then we arrive here, and all this does is it returns its own static property, which is static var, and static var is 0, and thus we see 0 here. That's all that happens, okay? Hope you understood the chain that goes on here from start to bottom. Static properties also have interesting attributes. We can make things, for example, let's create a public static function incrementer. Sounds cool, right? I'm the incrementer. Okay, and this incrementer, what does it do? It has a for loop, and in this for loop, well, we use I because people always use I. We set it to 0. We say that I should stop when it's smaller than 5. And we increment I by 1. That's our for loop in the incrementer function. Public. It's always public, but for simplicity I put the keyword now. Just to help you guys to make it more clear that the public keyword doesn't have any effect on me being able to access the static property method from outside the class, okay? In this case, if I don't put it, it's still public. If I could put it private, but that wouldn't make any sense because I want to access it from the outside. This is why I declared a static function. Okay, and now this for loop, all it does is it echoes out the static variable, static var, and it increments it every time the for loop runs. And then it returns it. Again, return self, 2 colons, and then static var. Okay. Now you're gonna see some interesting stuff here that's different from regular variables or properties in classes. We go ahead and we call the incrementer, and the first thing that happens, can you guess the output? Remember, the for loop runs first time 0, and it increments static var by 1. So var is 1. Then the second time, then the third time, then the fourth time, then the fifth time, and in the end, the static var is 5. Now what would happen if I were to call the incrementer class, the incrementer method from outside the class again? What would you expect this to be? Let's put a new line here, just for readability. Now again, if I call it again, we start from 0, we go up to 5, Then we quit the for loop. What do you expect the static var to be if I call the incrementer method again? It's 10 now. Now what does it mean? Because usually when a function gets thrown off the execution stack, it's gone, right? And but the thing is, with static properties like static var, they keep their value. In PHP, a normal variable would lose its value and go back to 0 again. But the thing with static variables or properties is that they keep their value. So when I call the incrementer function the second time, static var already has the value 5. And we start from 5, the loop runs 5 times and increments static var by 1 each time. So we got 10 at the end. And this goes on and on. So this is a highly interesting and important attribute of static functions, is that the variables that are static, that they keep their value. And this can be important for some things. You can also declare a regular function. Okay, so it doesn't even have to be in a class. You can just go ahead and create a regular function like this, for example, and use static variables like this. Okay, it's the same principle. If I call it and if I increment it, then every time it keeps its value. Does it return ink? No, it doesn't. So we go ahead and echo. Oh, sorry. That's not how you call a function. This is how you do it. Echo ink. Here we go. All right. Unexpected return. Yeah, you should always put a semicolon at the end of each line. Okay. And now we have 1. And it's the same principle. Every time I do this, it keeps its value and it gets incremented. You see that? So static variables keep their value in memory and we can work with this. Normal variables, so if this wasn't a static variable, for example, this gets set to 0, then we have 1 every time we call it. Okay, so one more thing to add here, let's erase this, is the parent keyword, because now we always use the self keyword. That is because the static variable was part of the own class. We declared it here in its own class and then it's self. Now let's go ahead and create a class hyperclass, which has a static function called test. Okay, and this test function just returns 1, because why not? Okay, we don't need it to do anything fancy right now. Then if we go ahead and our superclass extends the hyperclass, then we would like to call this function test. So we try to return self test. And here from outside we would go ahead and call this static method and we get a 1. This works because it inherited the 1 from the parent class. So we can call it with self. But if, for example, in your own class, you would go ahead and create a static function test, which does something else, then the behavior changes. For example, this returns 2. And now if you try to do that, it's 2, because the keyword self always tries to look in its own execution context, which is this class. It looks for a function. this works. And I've overridden the function test from the parent class within my child class. So self refers to this test, and we get a 2. If I want to access the parent method, then I have to put the keyword parent, and then I will get 1. Because now it knows that I'm not talking about this execution context's test function, but I'm talking about the parent class. So it goes up the chain to its parent function, and it returns this method. Guys, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I see you in the next tutorial.